And I am very excited to bring forward our next panel and presentation here at the Big Connect, presented by Comcast Business. It's Equity and Inclusion Through Authentic Means, Cracking the Inclusive Leadership Code. And we're joined this morning by Simone Morris, CEO of Simone Morris Enterprises. And Simone, good morning, and thanks for being with us and leading our panel discussion.
Good morning, Garrett. Thanks for having me, and thanks for having this panel discussion. So important. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And Simone, I should just mention the HR Source is our sponsor for this morning's panel. So great organization to work with if you're looking to do diversity and inclusion. We just want to mention the HR Source. Simone, over to you.
Yes, if you would give me access to share my screen, that would be wonderful.
Great. Let's see, I'll make sure you have it. Is it not letting you share right now? Perfect.
Can you see my screen?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Good morning, everyone. As Garrett said, we're here for the Equity and Inclusion Through Authentic Means panel discussion, Cracking the Inclusive Leadership Code. I'm so happy to be here with you all. Before we jump into the panel discussion, I will be doing some foundation setting just around the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, also talking to you about a few best practices, and jumping right into the panel discussion. I have three wonderful panelists that are joining me today, and I'll introduce them shortly. Just a little bit about Simone Morris Enterprises. We're also in the inclusive leadership space. We provide inclusive leadership solutions. We like to say that we transform leaders and cultures. I'm a certified minority women-owned business, and have shared my thought leadership in Forbes, Entrepreneur, Glassdoor, etc. I'm just really passionate about this work, and I have been doing it for a number of years, and just excited that the conversation is at the forefront. We're talking about it in today's expo, and if you look around, whether it's media or organization, wherever you look, people are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the need to make changes. Today's agenda, we will talk about really what is the business case for inclusive leadership, and what are some best practices that individuals and companies alike can take to create a more inclusive organization. And then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So what do we mean when we say equity and inclusion? Let's take a look at that. In terms of equity, some of you may have seen this slide, but if you haven't, the term equality really means everyone has an equal opportunity, and it has been around for a number of years. So if you take a look at the image, you can see equality demonstrated on the left-hand side of your screen. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so again, you see that not everyone can see the game. They can see over the fence, even though they all have an equal opportunity. On the right-hand side is equity. It's the same photo, but we see that everyone is now able to see over the fence. And in 2020, there really is a push for more equity in the workplace, more equity in the world as well. Now, what do we mean when we say inclusion? Now, this is more than the electric slide. I'm doing a little shimmy here. What I like to bring up is Verna Myers. Verna Myers is one of my favorites, and she's the Chief Diversity Officer over at Netflix, and she's done a lot of work in this space and is a trailblazer. Now, she defines diversity as being invited to the dance, and inclusion as being asked to dance. And I always tell my students or my clients this definition because I think it really drives home the message or the simplicity of the definition that you can in fact have diversity and not have inclusion. And some organizations are challenged with that, or vice versa, right? So diversity, we are all complex human beings. We have similarities and differences. Most of what we see above the iceberg, if you will, race, gender, some other different things. Those are easy to notice in the eye, but really below the iceberg, there's a lot more. There's diversity of thought, maybe the location that we're from, our parental status, and so much more. So it really is complex when we say diversity. Do I have diversity in the workplace? Again, most people look at race and gender to make an assessment, but it's a lot more than that. It's about physical ability. It's about sexual orientation, so much more. So that's what we mean when we say diversity. And when we say inclusion, it means giving people a seat at the table to allow their voices to be heard, to allow them to participate. That's why you see so much focus around board diversity. What does your board look like when you're saying that you have an inclusive environment? What does your leadership team look like? What does your employee base look like? What does your customer base look like, etc.? So that's what we mean when we say diversity and inclusion at a very high level. Now, I want to talk to you about the business case for inclusive leadership in general. 2020 is a different kind of year. I am sure that you will agree, and not just because of COVID. There have been many things that have impacted inclusive leadership in 2020. You all should know the name George Floyd. If you don't, Google the name George Floyd, but George Floyd was a cataclysmic moment for 2020. George Floyd was murdered by the police, and it really brought attention to racial equity and just pushed the conversation that traditionally stayed outside of the workplace into the workplace. So traditionally, most people feel when it comes to things like politics, we know there is a lot going on this journey to a new president and even the aftermath of that. There are a lot of things that traditionally were left outside of the workplace. And I put up George Floyd because I want you to know that he really cracked the door open for this to come into the workplace, this conversation. So companies cannot ignore this conversation. And now they're having to grapple with, what do we do about race? How do we go about providing more racial equity? How do we recognize Black and brown employees? I don't know what to do. If I stay quiet, it's not a good thing because it's complicit. If I speak up, I may say the wrong thing. So there's this challenge around what to say or what to do in 2020 post George Floyd. And again, this has really shone attention on the political landscape and conversations around politics. So I bring that up because it's important. I want you to know that people are fighting to be included. When you think about the word inclusion, I means I want to be included. And the word starts with I. These people, everyone is fighting to be included. I think if you think about it, there may have been a time where you have felt excluded. Think about it. How did you feel if you felt excluded? Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was at your place of worship. Maybe it was in a store where someone ignored you and you were waiting and you're like, wait a minute, I want to be a part of this. Maybe it was at a PTA meeting. It could be anywhere. Maybe it's even in your own family, where if you think about sexual orientation, some people are staying in the closet because they're afraid of what the response would be. And so therefore they are hiding who they are and not feeling included in the family. So this thing is super complex. I do not have time to go over every bullet point on this slide. I show it because I want you to know that there are many things that you may not think about that are signaling people want to be included. Very briefly, we've talked about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and how visible that is today and how impactful. If you think that it's not impacted your business, you are mistaken. It has. So there's a fight about my race matters. See me as a Black or brown person. No, Blue Lives Matter. My position matters. My work matters. So there is identity versus race, and there's a clash with that. Even sexual orientation. Many, many years ago, the LGBTQIA community was targeted at a nightclub in Orlando, and it was a hate crime where, many people died around that. And that is around the LGBTQIA community, as well as the people who have physical limitations, and it doesn't have to be a visual physical limitation, but it actually is impacting the workplace because there's a push to have people with physical challenges in the workplace hire me. And then we know about the Me Too movement. There's just so much around Me Too. It may be a little bit quieter this year because of what's going on with Black Lives Matter, but it's still there. So we've got gender equality, and I can go on and on and on, but that's just to let you know that we are continuing to fight for inclusion. In addition, the workplace is changing. We now have 5 generations in the workplace. So just imagine communicating between, if you have a millennial in the home, or even a different generation, the younger generation, Gen Z, in the home, and you're trying to communicate and there's conflict and you're just butting heads. Take that into the workplace and see that we've got baby boomers and more, 5 different generations trying to communicate, trying to resolve conflict, trying to work towards a common goal, and it's challenging. In addition, millennials, by the year 2025, 75% of millennials will be in the workplace. So you've got to think about, what does your board look like? Do you have a millennial on your board? Are you promoting millennials in your organization? If you're not, you're going to have to think about that. People of color, by the year 2030, there's going to be 54% of people of color. Just think about that and think about what your workplace looks like, or even outside of the workplace. What does your association look like? What are you focusing on? You have to keep these things in mind because the world is in fact changing, and it's changing to a more inclusive world, and not everybody is happy about it, but it is changing. Here's my bottom line. This stuff is hard work. This is Simone's truth serum. Inclusion is hard work. You are going to do what I call the bumble, stumble, and rise. That means you're going to mess up. You are going to intentionally or unintentionally exclude someone. Don't let that stop you. Keep going. So it's hard work. It requires you to be self-aware to see how you land. And by the way, if you don't know how you land, ask, how did that land? Do a pulse check. How did that land? And if it didn't land correctly, course correct and say, gee, I'm sorry. This is going to require some vulnerability. And it's important for me to stop here and talk about vulnerability because in 2020, more and more companies were asked to be vulnerable. So it wasn't just a matter of making large donations. The donations were then questions to say, okay, you made this large donation in support of racial solidarity. Let me go and look at what your organization looks like. And you may have heard the term performative allyship, where organizations were really being challenged that you're not really truthful, you're throwing money at the challenge, but your house needs to be cleaned up. So it's not always easy work. Again, you're gonna bumble, stumble, and rise. Rise is to get up the next day and try again. So let's quickly look at best practices, because we do want to bring our panelists in, because I know it's going to be an exciting conversation. I'm going super fast, but keep in mind that this training could be a whole day or 90 minutes or so, and we're moving at breakneck speed to keep on time. But I do want to tell you at a high level some of the things that you can do to create inclusive cultures. Number one is to cancel the one and done culture. I like to say, think about the gym. If you went to the gym once during COVID and you lifted some weights, or perhaps you hit the elliptical, are you in good shape mentally, physically? Are you feeling healthy? Perhaps not, because if you offer one training around harassment, discrimination, etc., and you expect your leaders as well as your employees to be inclusive leaders, think again. So my message to you is to cancel the thought around one and done. Take a look at your training. What training are you offering to employees to be more inclusive? If you're not offering it, then think about, when we're outside of the workplace, how many things are vying for our attention? And are individuals going to commit to doing the work to be more inclusive? By the way, some of the things that get us into trouble about being inclusive is that we've been taught the right way of doing things. And the right way that we've been taught by our parents growing up may not necessarily be the right way to do things. So you're battling that where, you know, someone may be working for your company for 2 years, 3 years, but they have a whole life of lived experiences that they need to tackle and unpack, etc., to show up and be more inclusive if they've been taught, no, that behavior is wrong. And now you just automatically expect that they are going to be respectful, etc., whatever your policies are to keep the job. Think again, because what might be happening is code switching, where they come into the workplace one way and then walk out the door another way. And sometimes it actually happens in the organization. So cancel and done is number one. Listen frequently. A lot of organizations are doing listening right now, listening around politics and the election aftermath. If you ignore the elephant in the room is still in the room. So if you don't talk about politics, don't talk about Black Lives Matter, it's still there. And it's not just a race thing, it is still there. Our families are changing. I told you about how the demographics are changing in the world. And so families look very different in 2020. So don't challenge your assumptions of what you think and who you think this is important to talk to about. These are conversations that are in the workplace, whether you're talking about them or not. So listen to your employees frequently, provide opportunities. I'm excited to talk about the next one because one of our panelists, Jean Christensen, is really going to shed some more light around this best practice, but really it is to broaden your lens. When you say I can't find diverse talent, think about this octopus, if you will, about with many legs in terms of diversity and inclusion. So looking at supplier diversity as an option is also another way to diversify or to create a more inclusive culture, because you look at the vendors that you work with and you bring in innovation, more innovation from leveraging these diverse vendors. So, and the last bonus one that I would say is really around walking the talk. Walking the talk. Do not just do this work lip service to say that you are an inclusive culture. Instead, I encourage you to be vulnerable to say, I don't have this all figured out, but we're willing to work on it. One of the things you might do is there's something called a CEO Action Committee. Your CEO could be a part of that committee that is dedicated and focused on creating truly inclusive workplaces. So your CEO could be having the conversation at that level. And by the way, this is all hands-on. It's not just HR's responsibility or corporate social responsibility or your legal team. Everybody has to get on board in 2020 to win at inclusion. Whew. That was a lot and it was quick. I'm around. You can connect with me on SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org, and I will be around for this Big Connect wonderful event. But enough from me. I want to bring in the panelists that you are here to hear from, our esteemed panelists. In fact, the first two have won the Equity and Inclusion Award by the Chamber, that is sponsored also by the Community Foundation. So let us welcome our panelists. I'm going to ask them to put their video on. First, we have Denise. Oh, Denise. I can't believe I even asked you this, to pronounce your last name properly, but in terms of being inclusive, I don't want to butcher it, so I'm going to try, and please, please, please correct me if I say it wrong. Denise Kennedy. Denise. Kennedy. Okay. Kennedy. It sounds like Kennedy with a C. I got to get it right in my head. Denise Kennedy, Chief Compliance Officer at Marrakesh Inc. Jean Christensen, welcome, President and CEO of Jean Christensen Associates, LLC. Welcome, Jean. Arthur Thomas, Director of Entrepreneurial Initiatives and Inclusive Economic Opportunity for the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm so excited to delve into this conversation. I have laid some foundation rather quickly, but I wanted people to know that this is an important conversation and there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And I'm hoping you all will add some more flavor to the conversation. The first thing that I want to talk about is to really ask you, each of you, to really tell me what drives your passion for equity and inclusion. And let's start with Denise.
Okay, so I have been passionate about equity and inclusion since I could remember. I come from a large family. I'm one of 7 siblings. So I was the one who always questioned, is this right or is this fair? So that started early on as a young kid, that I had the know-it-all to say, something is not right. This may be a little bit off here, so let's explore it. And that has guided me throughout my life, through academics, through my career. I am a woman of color. I have Black and brown children. I identify as a lesbian woman. So there have been plenty of times where I felt like I didn't have a seat at the table. And not because there weren't enough seats at the table, it was because I wasn't even asked or considered. So my passion is to be a part of the solution, to make sure that anyone within my touch and within my reach and within my community don't have to feel like that everyone feels included and have equity and diversity in their life. So it's extremely important to me. I work at an agency that's very diverse. We pride ourselves on being diverse, equity, and inclusive. We have an active MMAC council that I'm a part of. So this work is very personal for me for many reasons.
Wonderful, Denise. I just want to ask you a question, just from a curiosity, because many others may feel this way, but they're not bold enough to ask it. You came out and just dropped the mic by talking about your identity with regards to being a lesbian. Have you always felt comfortable to just say, hey, I'm Denise and I'm a lesbian?
Yes, so there were times in my life where I was married and I had children. I was married to a man and I was part of a specific religion where that wasn't acceptable. So I carried on my life denying who I was, denying my identity. And then I had to go to the leaders of that place and say, listen, I know this is not accepted here, but this is who I am. So if you're asking me to choose who I am and what's important to me and continuing to worship here, I have to choose me. And that's what I did. And I was comfortable ever since then, identifying as a lesbian Black woman.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome. Can't wait to hear what else you have to say.
Awesome. I have a lot.
Oh, all right.
I'll try to keep it toned.
Yeah, look, this is the right place to do it. Okay. Arthur, good morning. Good morning. Welcome. What drives your passion for this work, Arthur?
Good morning, Simone. Good morning, Denise, and thank you for sharing. I think there are a few things for me that kind of fuel this passion for me. For me, equity and inclusion begins and ends with humans. I mean, honestly, with real people's lives. This is a humanity question. And so I have to start this with how I grew up and thinking about how we see each other, because how we see each other affects the way we treat each other. And I'm speaking about some basic things like Denise said, what were we taught? How did we grow up? What did our grandmothers teach us about good old fashioned love, right? To some people, it's that faith-based love, depending on how faith is perceived. And that love kind of fuels my passion. And then I would say next is honestly, the portrayal of Blackness in Western culture, where Blackness is this ultimate symbol of deviance, denigration, and devaluation. That symbol, kind of attacked my very sense of self as a child. I was always trying to attack it, at least. The value of my family, the value of my community. And so from there, I would say there's this sense of righteous anger that fuels my passion. I mean, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and I was privileged to, from there, attend some of the best academic institutions in the world. But too many of my friends had different circumstances. Too many of them were just as bright, exceptionally brilliant, too brilliant not to have the same fighting chance as I did. And so when I entered into these top universities, made friends with privileged people, had jobs at hedge funds, and learned the fundamentals of financial instruments and real estate development. And all honestly, I kind of felt duped. I felt duped for them. I realized that the gap in opportunity was not due to a deficit in intelligence or, but it was a deficit in, exposure to networks and exposure to mentorship. There were structural forces that prevented my brothers and sisters from Newark from getting the same care and attention, the same cultivation and resources. So I sought out to play my part, and fill in that gap. I started an organization, a nonprofit organization back in Newark that began mediating and educating people in these resources. And that kind of fuels my passion. It was like acting out this love that I felt. And I feel like, again, love is key here. Honestly, it may sound old fashioned, but with equity, we're asking, how do we operationalize that love? How do you get people to treat other people well? You use that graph of making sure they have all the boxes they need to see possibility. I mean, that's the core of equity. It's a value system, honestly, for me. It's believing and embodying this ethic that everyone deserves a fair shot at flourishing and opportunity. And so I feel like if you embody love, then equity becomes more than just a term. It becomes more than a definition. It becomes a way of life. So that's kind of what fuels my passion.
I don't know if people are picking this up, but it kind of felt like you were ministering, and perhaps because I know your background includes ministry, but well said, so beautifully said, and I love the piece about equating equity to love, human love. I love it. Thank you and welcome. Jean, how about you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So thank you, Simone, and thank you everyone on the panel for the question. What really fuels me starts in the home. My entire family is diverse. So it includes pretty much every race, gender, so we have Black, Latino, Asian, there are veterans in the family. There are people who identify as gay or lesbian. So it's just, I've grown up in this environment my entire life. And what's really interesting to me is that you get to see the impact of a lack of inclusion, you get to see how it impacts each and every family member, each and every person or group differently, depending on where they are or where they grew up or what they have access to. So, that equity piece is really important because, when people are not treated equally, it has a profound impact on their ability to survive. And I'm talking about health and wellness. I'm talking about the ability to earn. I'm talking it impacts everything. So I get to see this, and I've been exposed to it my entire life. Both of my parents are immigrants also. So when you think about what's happening in the world, sometimes we look at race and gender, but then you think, wow, what's happening to people who are coming to the United States, and everybody's coming for a better life, and yet those opportunities are just not available, and the impact on them, the impact on their families, it's tremendous. A lot of the work that I am doing is really focused on helping people to gain access to opportunity. Because again, I've had the privilege of experiencing how my life has changed and how my family's life has changed when given access to opportunity. So that is really my primary focus, and that is why I'm really passionate about it. It's personal, and it's about closing the wealth gap. It's about, being able to have the ability to choose for ourselves. Where do we want to live? Where do we want to raise our kids? What kind of food we have access to, period. What kind of healthcare? These are the things that keep me up at night, every single night. And these are the things that I am passionate about and that I am fighting for my community.
I love that. I love how each of you answered the question so differently and gave us a little piece more to think about, Jean. And I love how you brought family into it, because oftentimes we can look into the workplace or look elsewhere, but look at your dinner table, Thanksgiving is coming up. Look within and look for opportunities to see this stuff up close. I love that you did that. Thank you, Jean, and welcome. So Denise, congratulations on Marrakesh's award. And we want to hear about some of the best practices that you all are doing. Let's bring this to life. What are some of the tangible things or evidence, if you will, that you can share about this work?
So it all starts with who you bring into the organization, right? Where do you find the people who are working for you? We work with a diverse population of people. We work with people who are of many different ethnicities and cultures and religions and ages and orientation. So we look for those type of platforms when we're recruiting our staff to work for us, right? So we want to have a diverse workforce to mirror the diverse people that we're providing services for. So during the onboarding process, our president and CEO and our chief administrative officer have a conversation with the new hires to talk about our core values within the organization, which includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, to let them know from the door, like, this is what we're about. And if this is not a good fit for you, it's okay, it's no hard feelings, but this is what we do here. So it starts at that base level. And then we also connect with the community. We have an Academy for Human Service training program, which is a 12-week training program where it prepares people for entry-level positions in the human service field. And 100% of those participants are people who are underconnected and underserved, and majority are people of color. And then for promotional opportunities, we realized a long time ago that the majority of our supervisor and manager level positions required you to have a degree, which if you had a degree, great, that was good for you. But if you didn't, where did that leave you? Where was your opportunity for upward mobility? So then we said, well, how can we make this more equitable and inclusive? So we were able to look at some of the positions and relax some of those requirements and say you can have experience in lieu of a degree. And for the positions that still require you to have a degree, we have a tuition reimbursement program. So if you want to go back to college, we will pay up to 70% of 2 of your classes per semester. So we try to bring everything to the forefront to say this is an equitable and inclusive organization, that you are welcomed here and you have a seat at the table. One of the things that we did most recently that I'm super proud of in the wake of the George Floyd murder is we did a survey, which people said you guys were brave or crazy or out of your mind to do that. So we did a survey to all of our staff, and it was an anonymous survey to rate us: non-racist, anti-racist, or racist. And it was an anonymous survey, so people can speak freely of how they feel we are performing as an organization. And I have to say that the response to that survey was so overwhelming, which showed us that people cared about this. And this was important for people to know, that we want to know how we are doing. We have the tuition reimbursement. We have a diverse workforce. We have other services we offer to our staff, but what can we be doing better? And I'm happy to say, we hit the send button and we crossed our fingers and we hope that people felt about us the way we saw ourselves. But, we took a gamble with that. And we're pleased that we were rated as not racist, but we were just a little bit above the non-racist. So we still have a lot of work to do to get to the anti-racist side. So that is our most recent initiative that we're working on to ensure that we're having an equitable and inclusive environment for people to come to work every day and provide the services that we're providing. So that's some of the best practices we've been doing. We have a lot of work to do. The result of the survey was, not surprising. We felt that we were where we were, but we realized that we still have a lot of work to do.
A lot of good work. I'm wondering about getting leadership buy-in to get that feedback, because sometimes the feedback can be hard to digest. So just very quickly, can you tell us about getting leadership bought into doing such a pulse check, if you will, on whether or not your organization is racist, non-racist, et cetera?
Right. So we talked about it beforehand, of course, and we said, we made a public statement when George Floyd was murdered, right? So it's not enough just to say, okay, we made this statement, and then now what? We had to turn inward and say, okay, so where are we with this? Are we having any type of systematic or structural racism under our umbrella where we work? So our leadership had 100% buy-in. We said, we want to know, good, bad, or indifferent. We need to know. We can't fix what we don't know. So that's what, everyone was on board with it. And we've created like a strategic plan to move forward with the results of that survey. We've been meeting with some consultants to help us do the work to look at all of our policies to make sure that we don't have things that are, set up to put barriers for people. We do monthly myth busters, like what is racism, prejudice, and discrimination? What is not? Identifying what's the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. So we're actually doing the work, and we know it's not a one and done. Like you said earlier, it's not, okay, we check that box off, we're done. Woo, we have no more work to do. This is a forever ongoing endeavor for us. And we're committed to the process because it's important. We promote diversity and inclusion, and we have to make sure that we are walking the talk.
Wonderful, wonderful. Gosh, I'm sure everybody in the audience is wanting to know more, but let us jump over to Arthur, and you tell us from your purview and the work that you're doing with entrepreneurial empowerment, economic empowerment. Tell us some best practices and how organizations can really engage.
Sure, thank you. Here at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, we really have been promoting our inclusive growth strategy. And the inclusive growth strategy has a few pillars. Of course, there's a section that focuses on some of the internal equity and inclusion work, but then a major component for the external outreach is the development, as you mentioned, of what we call an equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it's really sort of like a trailblazing initiative here in New Haven. And so when thinking about an equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem, I think a major way to think about that in two components is equity and technical assistance, right? There's a power component and there's a capacitation component for entrepreneurs. And so when thinking about cultivating that ecosystem, and there's some few critical best practices. Number one is you need a local council, a set of cross-sector stakeholders who are actually doing the work on the ground right now. We're not saying that this is just starting. There are people already involved who represent different sectors of the ecosystem to ensure that representation at all levels is apparent and it's necessary for critical transformation that we're seeking. So a local council, development of a local council. Another critical element is messaging. Messaging is mandatory. Narratives are the heartbeat of the story. What are the narratives of entrepreneurship? What are the narratives of who gets to be an entrepreneur, and how do we define what entrepreneurship looks like? Narratives that affirm the very being and doing of Black persons, brown persons, women, narratives that increase the sense of belonging by addressing that root ideology of anti-Black racism and the inferiority narratives that come with Blackness and brownness and the communities also that they dwell, right? Another component is a landscape analysis. It's necessary to conduct analysis of the gaps and strengths in our ecosystem, especially for historically marginalized entrepreneurs in economically segregated communities. Again, we're assessing the gaps in power, technical assistance, and proximity to critical networks and capital, right? Another best practice is this notion of connectivity, building a connectivity platform that provides access to information, resources, and other businesses within the entrepreneurship region, right? It's really like a neural network of both entrepreneurs and the support organizations for entrepreneurs. And then we have a strategic plan. This is obviously really important for any type of organizational initiative, but really like a short and long-term strategic plan that is based on the landscape analysis that was mentioned earlier, addressing not only the acute issues short term, but how are we thinking about building something that's sustainable and perpetual that's life-giving for entrepreneurs? And then there's capital, obviously. Capital is huge, right? If you're going to be talking about equity, where is the money? And so
Show me the money.
Show me the money, right? We can't, everything else is all good, but in our communities, we're like, who's giving us some money? Who's really, put your money where your mouth is. And so, one of the things
your mouth is, isn't that the truth?
Right? And so one of the things that we're thinking about is like one of the beautiful things about foundations is this notion of an endowment, right? Some of the more privileged institutions of power. So why don't we set up an endowment that will fund the ecosystem, right? An ecosystem for developing Black, brown women and other historically marginalized entrepreneurs, refugees, formerly incarcerated, So this notion of capital and how do people contribute to a fund that will invest in local entrepreneurship ventures? And then lastly, when thinking about equity and barriers for entrepreneurship and even ESOs, we're thinking about stipends. This is a really important practice. Stipends for entrepreneurial development and capacitation. There are barriers to entrepreneurship for many individuals in households: childcare, transportation, just the opportunity and cost that it takes to join an entrepreneurial accelerator versus, going to a job. And so we're trying to think through all of those things and incorporate those practices into the development of this ecosystem.
Oh, so much good information, Arthur. I wonder who's doing it well. We ended on capital and people putting their money where their mouth is. For me, I thought about JP Morgan Chase and a recent billions of dollars. But in your mind, who's doing it well? Give us some companies, just perhaps from a benchmarking standpoint, or just to think about.
So yes, there's Bank of America, PayPal, JP Morgan are some national organizations that have decided to commit capital. But I also think it's more than just committing capital. It's actually ensuring that the distribution channels meet the people that need it. As we saw with the economic stimulus packages or PPP, I mean, the money was appropriated, but not everybody was able to access it. So it's really about not only providing the capital, but thinking through the distribution channels and supporting the organizations that are proximal to the people with the challenges and ensuring that they have the capacity. There are also local organizations. I mean, the city here, they dedicated resources. City of New Haven, put money up for small businesses who were suffering from, COVID-19 and already were suffering from just disparities in entrepreneurship and business. The Community Foundation, there are other foundations locally. Thank God, there are local organizations, banks, CDFIs here that are really, passionate and about the work and providing the resources to back that passion.
Absolutely. I believe Connecticut has the Connecticut Cares Act now as well. All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. I want to get over to Jean because this stuff is near and dear to my heart, really, to talk about some best practices around supplier diversity. What's happening there, and bring your expertise in, Jean.
Thank you, Simone. So the first thing I want to say around, just all of this is that I feel that I've been in business for nearly 4 decades, right? And so I've had the experience of seeing political unrest or social unrest happen, and in the corporate space, the reaction to it. So what we're seeing right now is a reaction to social and political unrest, George Floyd's deaths. And prior to that, if you think just a few years, earlier, we were reacting to Me Too. And we were asking the questions of, well, should we add more women? Should we add more Blacks? And I find that offensive. That is my personal feeling about it, because it doesn't last. It's a reaction. And then, slowly things start going back to normal. And then sometimes we actually take steps backwards. So when we're talking about the response as it pertains to best practices in corporate supplier diversity, my first recommendation is start with why. Because if you're just reacting, this is just going to happen again. It starts with the culture within the organization. To first take a look, and it starts with leadership. That is where it starts. It's the culture. It is why do you want to be diverse? It's a buzzword right now. It's you go on LinkedIn, all the positions, chief diversity officer, everybody wants to be diverse right now because it's the in thing to do. But my recommendation is you start with why. And don't tell me that, it's the right thing to do, because that is not an answer, okay? So some things I recommend looking at is, if you are a corporation or an anchor institution, your why is tied to your customers. It's tied to your community. It's tied to your employees. And if you want to continue to grow and have a sustainable business, like in 2030, where you mentioned, for example, that 54% of the workforce is going to be diverse or millennials, your why is you need to make these changes in order to be innovative, in order to have a sustainable business model in the future. So that's the why. It's not the right thing to do. It is the survival of your business depends on it. Competition, innovation, are all a critical part, workforce development, all a critical part of the conversation. So it can't exist in like, okay, we're just going to do it in the workforce. It has to be an initiative that you look at each aspect of the business. As it pertains to supplier diversity, I think there's such a wonderful opportunity to create self-sustaining communities and ecosystems that don't rely on what I often hear, which is, this perception that, small, diverse businesses are less than, and that they're needing of all of this assistance. When you're talking about, and again, there are businesses that need assistance. So I want to be clear, when you're just starting out, we all need assistance. We all need that critical technical assistance and support because you don't know what you don't know. But when you get to a certain level where you've got proof of concept, you're
So when you
at a particular
enter, just
level,
enter with your camera
there's
off.
absolutely no reason that a company shouldn't be looking more closely at what is the impact that they're having on their local community? Are they inclusive? And again, when I think about best practices, I think of some of the things that are happening or what has been traditionally done with supplier diversity programs, which is you get certified, you register on a portal, and you hope for the best. That is not a best practice, folks, okay? It really requires you to take a look at who is in your community, because businesses could be, again, you think of disabled individuals who are basically just, kind of cast aside. And a lot of times people don't even consider them. So it starts with kind of benchmarking, looking at who is in your community and how you can be more inclusive as it pertains to the goods and services that you are procuring. And a lot of times corporations will, I've always been told when I walk into one of these rooms that, you need to think bigger, and you need to be a company that can manage, a global corporate supply chain. Guess what? I don't want to do that. Okay. And I don't think any of the other small businesses in the room want to do that. But what we want is to be able to sustain our businesses within our communities. So I think transparency is also, in terms of a practice, I'm not saying the companies, I don't want to create an environment where people think, oh, to do business with small, local, and diverse suppliers, you need to lower your standards. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need to think about, why is it that we're being told that in order for us to participate, we have to have this enormous bandwidth, when I think 90% of the small businesses are owned by sole proprietors and very small businesses, like with under 10 employees. So that is a barrier. So just thinking about that, okay, can we be more inclusive? Looking at things like one of the other panelists talked about, like the education component. Looking at, are we setting up, situations where it's so difficult, not only to get in, but to stay in. Looking at your payment process. This is something that we're going through right now, where we're in the middle of a pandemic and we still have corporate suppliers paying small businesses 90, 120 days, in some cases 6 months late. Why? That is just not, that whole conversation is tied to capital, and it's another barrier where it's like, okay, well, in order for you to do business with us, you have to extend us credit for 90, 120 days. That's not reasonable. So again, my recommendation is start with why, and really think about, because to your point, Simone, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It takes it takes a strategic plan to think about who you are as an organization. What is it that you're looking to accomplish? At what level can you create opportunities within your own community? And I'm working on some projects where it started very small, where they started looking at like the local dry cleaner, the deli, the deli, and those small businesses, and saying, you know what, they don't have to be global suppliers. Everybody eats lunch, right? We have these business meetings all the time. Why don't we bring in a local baker? Or why don't we bring in a local transportation company to help us? Or why don't we bring in the sole proprietor who's doing leadership training? It's just being more purposeful. And then when those companies come in, helping them to succeed through mentorship and a transparent process.
This is so good. I do not want it to end. So good. Let me first say congratulations to you as well, Jean, on your well-deserved award. You all can see what's happening here. We've got a talented group of panelists. And I'm going to say to Garrett and Tamika and Ray that maybe we need a diversity day just to unpack this a bit more, because it feels short and sweet. So many good things you say there. I feel like it is the right thing to do, and that's what I feel, because I go back to the love that Arthur talked about and just human love. I feel that I want people to know that this is the right thing to do, but also to put on the lens of how do we look at it holistically. So I love each of the pieces of what you are all saying. And what I got from yours, Jean, mostly was around really the thinking, spending time thinking it through. And the solid examples that you brought up that hit home for me as a small business solopreneur as well is just processes. Think about your processes in terms of how you are unintentionally causing barriers, and being less than inclusive. Because if you put that onto the small business where we've got to jump through, the portal and being solvent and have access to wait for you to pay us, then it can be challenging. So good. I do want to take the opportunity to see if there are any questions there, at least one question that I can pull in to the conversation. Any questions? Someone asked the question very briefly, panelists, about what are your thoughts about mentoring? Any one of the panelists want to share some commentary around mentoring and how that works as a part of their strategy?
I'll just comment that in terms of, small, diverse suppliers, mentoring is absolutely critical. It's one of the reasons why my business is a success, because we had a mentor and we were able to learn all those things that you can nobody teaches you in school, how to interact with a vendor, or the invoice process, or the politics around working with large corporations. So I think mentorship is critical. And I think as a small business community, like when we succeed, we should think about, mentoring that next company. It shouldn't just be a corporate initiative. It should be us thinking, all right, now I've got my first contract. How can I, include another diverse supplier as part of it? So I think mentorship is critical.
Can I just say really quickly? So we don't have a formal mentorship program at my place of business at Marrakesh. However, we do mentorship for our employees and the people we support. We are looking into developing a formal mentorship, but we all have mentors. Like I had a mentor, I've been there for going on 25 years, and I wouldn't have been able to be as successful in my career there without those mentors along the way. So we do it. It's just not in a formal mentoring program, but we do have it at Marrakesh. We do mentor one another.
Yeah, and I want to say it's wonderful that so many companies are offering the mentoring opportunities. Because if I think about Goldman Sachs and their training program, and these different companies with these training programs that now during the COVID or pandemic times, they're offering access to it, and it's an easier opportunity to get in and pick up the learning. So my hat's on mentoring as well. Arthur, were you going to say something as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting because a few years back, I had a conversation with Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin. Nancy Boyd Franklin and her husband, AJ Franklin, are some of the leading counseling psychologists that came out of Columbia and Boston College and around diversity, equity, inclusion. Before this was a term, counseling psychology sort of was the academic discipline that was really cultivating the practice that many corporations are using. So they mentored a lot of the students and professionals that are doing this work now. And I was having a conversation with her, and she's at Rutgers now. She said, you know, in her 30 years of doing community empowerment work, you know, and I asked her, what does she think we need to change the plight, the predicament? And she said, the one thing that I feel is necessary is mentorship, literally, for young Black and brown women, young Black and brown men, and Black children and adults. She said mentorship. And that touched me because even when I shared the best practices of building this ecosystem for entrepreneurship, you know, and they talk about economic mobility with the Urban Institute, some of the factors like, you know, access to resources, access to capital, access to the terminologies, to the language, has been a real critical deficit in determining equity. So mentors can come in and be proximate. You know, when we're building this work, when we're doing this work, when you're coming out of your organizations and going into the community and sharing professional development techniques, leadership development techniques, sharing financial instruments, sharing different business structures, that mediating of resources through mentorship is key. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think we cannot do any of this with some type of formalized and informal networks of mentorship.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, this has been so enlightful, and thanks for ending us on such a good note, Arthur. We are going to have to wrap up, and we will continue this conversation in the Zoom lounge. I want to thank Denise, Jean, and Arthur for being excellent panelists, and the Chamber for this opportunity to shine a light on, you know, such an important topic. Thank you so much.
Simone, thank you so much. And to everyone on the panel, I agree. It was a great session. We do want to let everyone know you can continue the conversation. The panelists are going to join us over in the Zoom lounge. That's our networking room, sponsored by the Energy Efficiency Programs at UI and Southern Connecticut Gas. So the link will be appearing in the chat. If you haven't seen it yet, click on that. That will take you to the Zoom networking room where you can continue this conversation, and they'll be able to see your faces and you can ask your questions as well. So again, Simone and panel, thank you so much.